So how do we go about thinking about solving these challenges? Copilot readiness is not going to necessarily be a end goal result. It's more of a framework for thinking that requires ongoing maintenance as well as ongoing compliance. So Copilot readiness is definitely something we start. It's an area where we get to a good place at, but it's not something that really has a true endpoint on it, because as we'll see, there is going to be some compliance factors and just ongoing maintenance. So number one is going to be data management. Some levers that we're going to want to pull on here are data governance. Who has access to what and why? Data orchestration. Where is data currently? Is it accessible to Copilot? Do we need to set up any coordinating flows of data from source to source to give it access? And is that efficient? And then data estate modernization and migration. This is really referring to legacy older data sets that have valuable information in them that we need to modernize and either get into the cloud, get into Dynamics, or figure out to an intermediary step such that Copilot can access that data and be unleashed upon it. So there's a data management component. And then there is an identity and access management component. Paxi has worked with a number of cybersecurity professionals in the field to identify a handful of CIS controls that, when implemented, allow us to at least put the minimum necessary safeguards in place. And so that's going to be the basic controls, CIS 1 through 6, CIS 7 through 16, and CIS 17 through 20. All of these really tie in together to ensure that users have the correct level of access, they have the correct level of security in place, and there is an ongoing maintenance of who has access, and the training and development to ensure that everybody stays sharp. Those are the policies that we generally recommend companies start working on towards improving their identity and access posture. And so those have been some pretty abstract concepts, to say the least. And so I put together this little graph here that I think really helps just make this a little bit more simpler and puts it in at least to some terms of some licensing for us. So on the x-axis, we have data, and we're looking at the level of data a particular user has access to in a given environment. On the left-hand side, we have zero access, i.e. an inert account. And to the far right, we have the full access / access to the most sensitive things. So global admins right over here, access to everything in the environment / anybody in your organization that has access to information that if it's 8 a.m. on a Monday morning and we got an email or a phone call or a text message saying, hey, this person's been hacked and they're down, how bad of a day that is for you. If it's a really, really bad day, that person is on this list. And so from no access to the most access, less access to the most sensitive mission critical data in the environment, juxtaposed against the identity protection. On here at the bottom, that's going to be just a username and password. Up here at the top is going to represent all of the identity security policies that Microsoft has in place that we can take advantage of to ensure a user is who they say they are. And so the way that I think about how do we solve at least the identity versus the access side is we want to think about who in the environment has the most access or access to the most sensitive information. And we're going to want to give them a license that provides intra ID plan 2. This is because we are going to be able to take advantage of risk-based conditional access policies, SSO, privileged identity management, access reviews, risk-based conditional access as well. I already said risk-based conditional access, as well as automated remediation on risky logins. All really good things that allow us as administrators and IT professionals to ensure that users who have sensitive access to sensitive information are locked down on the identity as much as we possibly can, because the only alternative is to remove their access to the sensitive information. And if we can't remove access to sensitive data, we have to harden those users' environments such that they're the only ones that can get in. And then as we work down the data access map to about here, where we no longer have access to any sensitive information, this is mainly public information, or just, it's private company information, but if it did end up getting leaked, it's not the end of the world. We don't want to go all the way to no security here, which is a username and password, but we will want to leverage at least an license that provides intra ID plan 1, so we can take advantage of just static conditional access policies, multi-factor authentication, enterprise SSO, and the ability to ensure that all users who have access to CoPilot have at least the minimum identity security policies in place, while everybody that has access to more sensitive information is getting the intra ID plan 2 license. And then once we've kind of mapped that out, we just codify these people's access via security group membership, information barriers, and information protection policies to ensure that at the end of the day, every user who has access to sensitive information are secure on the identity side, as well as they are the only people that can access that sensitive information. Everybody else has the more basic identity protection policies in place, and they can only access the information that's important to them, and they cannot access any of this information over here. And we, again, codify all of that via group policy, security group policy, security group membership, information protection, and information barriers. Whew. All right. And so as we start to think about how do we want to leverage CoPilot and who we should probably be thinking about on the identity and versus the data access management side of things, and trying to figure out just what it is we hope to use CoPilot for and how we're going to go about doing that. This flowchart really articulates well a good workflow for figuring out how to do this. And so we want to start here in the upper left-hand corner with what is the business outcome, i.e., what are we hoping to leverage CoPilot for? A really good example of this is I would like to leverage CoPilot such that within 6 months of implementation, I can reduce the administrative overhead by my sales team up to by 25%. Perfect. Once we have our first outcome, we then need to identify who are the primary users and what systems do they interface with. Well, for my business outcome here, reduce the sales staff administrative overhead by 50% after 6 months of launching. Well, primary interface is going to be my sales staff. What systems do we interface with? That's going to be Microsoft 365 as well as Salesforce CRM. Perfect. Now we move into what are the data sources and permissions required such that the primary users can achieve this business outcome. And so for my example, we're going to be talking about email data, Teams meeting transcript data, data that is in SharePoint, and then data that's in my CRM. All right. And so what data that I just listed is already in my tenant? That's going to be all the Microsoft stuff. The one thing that's not in Microsoft is our CRM data. So we're not going to likely migrate to Dynamics 365 Sales Enterprise as much as I'd love that. So we're going to have to look at, can we connect that data? And we can. Microsoft Copilot for Sales allows a user with Copilot and Salesforce to have an additional add-on that allows Copilot to integrate with Salesforce. Great. And then lastly, output data and permissions required. Where am I going to interact with the customer or the partner? How am I going to achieve this business outcome? Well, there's going to be an email component, some OneDrive component, a SharePoint component, a Teams component. And then for me, this other is going to be Salesforce CRM. And so when we're thinking about trying to figure out where do we start, it's really helpful to go through this exercise with a bunch of the different business unit leaders in your organization to try to identify across a number of different roles, across a number of different departments in your organization, 2 to 3 solid business outcomes that we're trying to achieve with Copilot walk through this conversation, trying to figure out which users, where's the data set, what are the output and the permissions required. And doing this will give you a great blueprint starting point for who should we license with Copilot first, what data are we going to be looking at to make sure they have access to, and what they shouldn't have access to. Is that data sensitive enough that we want to merit enhanced identity security? And then what do we need to do on any external data sources or output required such that we can achieve this positive business outcome leveraging Copilot? And so I did want to take a quick moment. We know at the very while ago we talked about the licensing requirements, and Microsoft casts a wide net now. So it's business basic, business standard, business premium, E1, E3, E5, M365, E3, M365, E5. Those are all eligible to utilize Copilot. However, now that we know how it works, i.e., it allows a user to interact with data that they have access to via human language, pulling down any information, aggregating and analyzing it to do whatever they wish with it, as well as that it will pull that information to any user that asks for it. There's some risk in there. And so my general recommendation is if we're considering Copilot, we're going to want to stick to one of these three licenses for the users that are going to have Copilot, namely because these three licenses, Business Premium, M365 E3, and M365 E5, give you as administrators and business owners the ability to ensure that all users that have Copilot have the necessary identity, email, inbox, endpoint protections in place, as well as the solutions to codify the data and access management and data loss prevention policies. And the way that I would think about who should get which license is starting at the most access / most sensitive access in the environment, or what I would consider a high risk, high value target. We're going to probably want to license those individuals with the M365 E5 because if they were to be breached, the level of access that they have could be very detrimental to the organization with any data exposures. And we're going to want to just throw everything we have at them. If not the M365 E5, maybe the M365 E3 plus some of the E5 security components. But once we've covered our high risk, high value individuals, we then look at the business premium license for every other individual up to 300. Once we hit 300 users on business premium, that's where anybody between the individual contributor getting business premium and our high risk, high value targets in the organization on E5 get that M365 E3 license to provide the necessary identity and access components required to ensure that they can access Copilot and do so safely, not while mitigating all risk that we've talked about here today. And so actually this slide is a little outdated, so I'm just going to skip this one. Sorry about that.